Hello, dear ones. Father Peter John coming to you from All Saints Orthodox Church in Bloomington, Indiana. Christ is in our midst. Today's gospel was about a certain king who wanted to settle his accounts. And so he called in one of his servants, and the servant owed him roughly $12 million. I mean, it sounds absurd, but this servant owed him roughly $12 million in modern monetary value. And so the king demanded that the servant pay everything, and when he couldn't pay it, then the king demanded that he be sold, he and his wife and children be sold to pay the debt. Well, the servant, when he heard this, he fell on his knees and he implored the king to please have mercy and be patient with him, and he would repay everything, which of course he couldn't. He couldn't repay $12 million. But the king was so moved by compassion that he forgave the debt altogether. And so this servant left forgiven. But when the servant was leaving, he found another servant of the king, one of his brother servants, and he saw him and he threw him up against a wall and demanded that he pay whatever he owed. And when the servant refused, he said, I can't pay it, but if you be patient, I will pay it. Then this servant, he was not merciful like the king had been, but instead he demanded that this brother of his be thrown into prison until the debt were paid in full. Now the debt that was owed, it was minuscule, it was a few bucks, right? Versus the 12 million that was just forgiven. But there's one part of this I want to talk about today, and that is that the Greek for when he says, pay everything you owe, the actual Greek literal translation is, pay me if you owe anything. Pay me if you owe anything. In other words, the servant who had just been forgiven the 12 million, he didn't understand what it was that was owed him. He didn't get it. He wasn't sure of the exact amount. He wasn't sure of the specific details of the debt. Now, I think this is powerful. I've never heard anybody talk about this because usually the translation they try to make it more friendly in the English. Pay what you owe immediately, right? But when you look at the Greek and you say, well, what did Jesus actually say? Jesus actually said, pay me if you owe anything. And I think Jesus is trying to tell us something there. I believe he's trying to give us an insight. And that is that when people sin against us or they have a debt against us, that we really don't know. We don't know the circumstances. All we see is the tip of the iceberg. All we know is that somebody said something offensive to us, or that somebody looked at us in a way that seemed mean, or that someone said something to somebody else about us. We feel like they were talking about us behind our back, or that somebody cut us off in traffic, or whatever, right? However it is that people sin against us, either something small and petty, or something huge and hurtful and traumatic, right? In any case, we don't know the extent of the circumstances surrounding that person and their actions, right? All we see is that, ouch, something hurt me. We don't know what it is that's going on. It's like when you're a kid, and there's a bee that stings you, and oh, why did that bee sting me? Well, if you understand bees, you knew the bee stung you because it was afraid. It was afraid of you, actually. So it stung you because it was trying to get away. And of course, the sad thing is, once the bee used up its stinger, it was dead. It only got one sting. And again, if you didn't understand that, you didn't feel any pity for the bee. All you knew was you got stung by the bee, and it hurt, and it swelled up, and it was ugly. And that mean bee, I can't believe he did that. But it's important for us to know that we don't know. It's so important for us. And Jesus says, judge not, lest you be judged. Jesus doesn't want us to judge other people because Jesus knows we don't know the circumstances, and he's the judge. Jesus says to us, if you do not forgive, you will not be forgiven. He's not trying to do that to be mean. He's just saying that in my kingdom, the people who are in communion with me, the people who want to be one with me, have got to be like me in the sense that I am totally, completely forgiving. And you need to be totally, completely forgiving as well, or you don't have, you are not in communion with me. So brothers and sisters, on this day of this great gospel, where we heard this man forgiven of his $12 million debt, we hear him refusing to forgive this petty cash that is owed to him by one of his fellow servants. And then we see this terrifying thing that the king says when the king calls the first forgiven man back into his court. And he says, I forgave you this huge debt, and you couldn't forgive this little debt of your brother? He says, sell. I think he put him in prison, if I remember correctly. Anyway, in any case, we hear these words, these final words of Christ in this gospel. So also will my Father in heaven do unto you if you do not forgive your brothers from your heart. So let's take those words to heart, take them very seriously, and pray for those who have hurt us or persecute us. Pray for them to be healed and to be forgiven, and grant and offer them our own forgiveness as well. Christ is in our midst. He is and ever shall be.